Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and I've got a wonderful show in store for everybody today. Hope you all have been doing well. I just had a nice little visit, actually, from my parents just for the day, and they spent the night and left the next day. It was good seeing them and spending some time with them. It's always very hard, especially right now with the pandemic, to spend much time with them. But once this is over, which I hope is sooner rather than later, in all honesty, we can spend much more time together, and when that day comes, it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful day. But getting into the episode for today, we've got a lot to discuss, going to do the obvious news, but a lot of other fun segments with early MVP watches and so on and so forth. So I'll first dive right into the news and share any and all of the latest ins and outs to the baseball world, and just get into any updates in the free agency-filled offseason that we've been having. As I move into the second segment, I'll discuss which teams who are in playoff droughts currently could possibly see those playoff droughts end this year. I'll share the teams in these droughts and which are more likely than others to break that streak. Afterwards, I want to get into an early MVP watch for this upcoming year. A couple names that could be obvious, but others might not be so obvious. A couple that are honestly, I think, sneaky picks. So you'll hear about that in segment number 3. But make sure you stay right here for the final few minutes of the show, as I'll get into the players who had breakout 2020 seasons that could follow up with similar performances in the 2021 season. So a lot to get into, and I want to get into it immediately because there's been a lot of things going on, a lot of moving pieces. But first things first, the Yankees, they're kind of one team that's popped in the news lately. They've actually lost a pitcher. Instead of gaining a pitcher, they've actually been very strategic in going out and getting a lot of starting pitching. But they just lost Masahiro Tanaka, who will be returning to his home country, which is Japan, and will be playing for the Rakuten Eagles, who he actually initially played for 7 years for a 7-year span. And then after that, he came to the Yankees for 7 years. His contract's going to be up, and he's going to be returning back to the Eagles. But clearly a big loss. I mean, I think that's very obvious. A lot of people felt that it was very inevitable with the acquirement of Corey Kluber and Jameson Taillon that Tanaka might be on the way out. But in all honesty, I felt that if they had kept obviously they went out and acquired Kluber and Taillon, then they have Cole. Why not keep Tanaka around? Why not try and persuade him to stick around and say, hey, with you, I mean, in that situation, in all honesty, I wouldn't even put Tanaka as the 4th option or even the 3rd option. I would maybe stick him there at 2nd because Corey Kluber's got a lot to prove, in my opinion. I mean, the guy has been pretty much out of baseball for good, more or less 2 last seasons. And he's been, I think it's only 8 starts he's made in those 2 years. So he really has not had a whole lot of action in a live MLB game in quite some time. And then Jameson Taillon, he's also been very injury-ridden. So I'm kind of confused on why they would decide to bring in 2 injury-ridden guys and let somebody like Tanaka, who has been a 2-time All-Star with the Yankees, he's got a career ERA in the MLB of a 3.74, and he had played very well in Japan before he came to the MLB. He was a 6-time NPB All-Star. He had a great ERA, below a 3 ERA, but this would have been a really good, I think, first 4 starters on this team. I think that their rotation would have been very good. Obviously, you have Cole as the 1st option, but in all honesty, I would definitely put Tanaka there at 2nd because between Kluber and Taillon, I think that Kluber has got not as much to prove as Taillon does, because Kluber has proven himself when he is healthy and when he's at the top of his game as being one of the better pitchers in baseball. I mean, from 2014 to 2018, the guy was a 2-time Cy Young winner, 3-time All-Star, and he had a couple seasons with 200-plus Ks. He had, I think, at least 3 to 4 years in that span where he had at least 18 wins or more. So, again, that's probably going to go back up, assuming that he's healthy and that he gets a lot of this run support that the Yankees clearly have. But Taillon, I think, has a ton to prove because he hasn't really, I think, been the player that a lot of people, especially in the Pirates organization, thought he was going to be. Then he started to show a little bit of glimpses of it here and there. But then as time went on, he started getting injured, and he's really been battling injuries the last 2 years. So I don't really know why they were okay with this, in all honesty. Kind of a head-scratching move by Brian Cashman. But Tanaka's K numbers were what really stuck out to me. He had 5 of his first 6 years in the MLB where he had 140-plus Ks. So, again, a guy can get out or can, strike out guys at a very high efficiency and a very high rate. Why would you let that go, especially for 2 guys that have been injury-ridden and haven't really had a whole lot of time in live action the last couple of years? So we'll have to see. Good luck to Tanaka moving forward. He's got, I think, more years left in him. I mean, he's only 32, so I think he's got a lot of time left in him. And not to mention, the guy can clearly pitch. He's shown it not only in the Japanese league, but he also showed it here in the MLB. So I think that he's overall a very good pitcher that I think the Yankees are going to miss ultimately. But there's also another team in New York, the New York Mets. They are back in the news as always, as they have found their replacement for Jared Porter, which is Zach Scott. And Zach Scott, I think, brings a lot of knowledge with him. He brings a very good background. He brings a very good winning mentality. He actually worked alongside Porter in Boston. He was there in Boston for 17 years, part of some World Series winning teams. So again, there seems to be this new mentality in the Mets organization that they didn't really, I don't think personally, have beforehand, right? It was this winning mentality, and I think that has been inserted into their culture and into their just overall franchise. And I think as a result, that's going to really alleviate and at least breathe some life into this Mets organization. And I think now that they've got, Porter gone, they bring in Zach Scott, who was actually at one point or another the assistant general manager. So again, he's been high up in front office management. He's been around having to make very crucial decisions. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, what I read was that when a lot of these decisions were being made in the offseason for the Mets, he was right there helping them out, being kind of a main piece to make these really crucial decisions. So he is somebody that has been in this kind of, I would say, position before, if you will, not necessarily to be a general manager, but to just have to make those crucial, very tough choices. He's been there. He's done that. This is also the third GM that's been in the front office for the Mets since really the first of 2020, right? I mean, this is since this offseason has started, in all honesty. First you had Van Wagenen, and then all of a sudden after that, you had Jared Porter, and then he gets fired, and now you're out back to Zach Scott. So you see a lot of different faces coming in and out of almost a revolving front door. And I think that, I don't know if it's going to play any sort of factor into this, because again, it's not like it's a manager or a coach or player personnel. It's just front office management, but that could potentially change things and how things might be done. That constant turnover, that constant changing, can they keep up with that? Are there going to be consistent mindsets that are going to continue to be in those positions for the Mets? Scott could have a totally different mindset than Porter did and Van Wagenen did. So that could definitely be kind of something that the Mets might have a difficulty adjusting to. It's just all of these different mindsets and personalities coming in and out of the door constantly. But the Mets, they're here to win. I mean, I think they've got a different mentality going into this year. Obviously getting Lindor, getting James McCann, some pretty big pickups if you ask me, and I think that's going to change things a little bit. Hopefully Noah Syndergaard can get back to the level that he was at before. I think that they've got, obviously some solid pitching across the board with Jacob deGrom. I mean, how can you not go wrong with him? He's a 2-time Cy Young Award winner in the last 4 years. And then you've got Marcus Stroman, who I think is one of the better back-end rotation pitchers in the MLB, in all honesty. If you put him there as a third or even a fourth guy, he's probably one of the best options that you could have at a third or fourth option as a starting rotation. So I think that they're going to be just fine in that category. Obviously, they do need to go out and probably get a little bit more here and there. But for the most part, I think that they've made this division in the NL East very, very competitive. So I'm really curious to see kind of, what's going to happen in New York. But let's not forget, there was another team last year that had a lot of different offseason moves and a lot of news circulating around them, and they were very underwhelming in 2020, and that was the Reds. I mean, they had a ton of hype going into the season. I think myself included and a lot of other people probably felt that they were going to be either first or second in the NL Central. Clearly not the case. So, I think that there's still a lot of things to be figured out. You still have to put this team on the field, and you have to make sure that they can produce. And if they can't, well, again, as another team that had a lot of hype in the offseason that didn't really do anything in the regular season or even in the postseason when it actually mattered. So we'll see how Zach Scott adjusts to the new role and if he can be, maybe somebody that sticks around for the long run. I mean, I read a couple articles saying that if he does a good job, he's got the job. So this is kind of a trial and error thing that the Mets are doing, and we'll have to see if that's going to, pan out for them in the end. But the Mets are, again, still in the news, and I really don't know how one team is in the news so often. Obviously, I think maybe them being in New York, that has a lot to do with it. But they actually went out and picked up one of the top bullpen arms from the 2020 Tampa Bay Rays, and that is Aaron Loup. Loup was very good for the Rays. In all honesty, I do not know why the Rays continue to lose pitchers when that was their strong suit. That was what they were known for going into the playoffs, even in the playoffs, in the World Series. Everybody knew that their strength was pitching. When you had the three-headed monster in the starting lineup with Charlie Morton, and then you've got Blake Snell and Tyler Glasnow, and then you had guys coming out of the bullpen left and right. You had Fairbanks, you had Loup. The list just goes on and on and on, and you had a lot of guys that could throw the ball hard, and Loup was one of them. I mean, he had a 2.5 ERA. He had 25 innings of action, 22 Ks in those innings in 2020, and he had the second lowest ERA in the bullpen for the Rays. So, again, another pitcher that's out of Tampa Bay that had a really, really big year. And the Mets definitely need to add to their bullpen. I mean, this is one of the worst bullpens in the MLB. They were ranked 18th in team ERA as a bullpen. So this could be definitely a good add. It could maybe breathe some life and really try and put a little bit of extra talent inside of that bullpen and coming out of there, because, again, people don't really realize how important a bullpen is. Your starter can do so much, and then once it's out of his hands, then you kind of have to say, all right, we have to rely on our relievers and the guys that are going to be coming in after to try and hold this lead and try and, make sure that we can come out on the winning end. And so I think Loup is going to be a very good add for them, but I really do worry about the Rays and their pitching because they don't have great power hitting. They don't have great hitting, I would say, across the board, and they're losing a lot of pitching. I'm not going to go and try and speculate anything because the Rays, they know something that we all probably don't. I mean, they've taken teams to the World Series. They've been able to build teams that go deep into the playoffs with one of the lowest payrolls. So something is obviously working in Tampa Bay. I don't know what it is. I couldn't tell you, but it's working. And so that, I think, is all that matters. Now, I do think, though, there might be some sort of maybe rebuild phase, or maybe at least kind of a setback, and then trying to prepare for maybe the year after that or 2 years after that, trying to build a little bit for the future. But they did re-sign a lot of guys. They'll obviously have Randy Arozarena coming back, but the Mets just continuing to make a lot of moves, continuing to make a lot of changes, switch-ups. Obviously, I think that this NL East division as a whole, do I think that the moves that they made are going to take them to the highest point and to be first place in that NL East? I don't know. That division is pretty tough, if you ask me. The Mets weren't the only team that made a lot of additions. The Nationals made a lot of additions, and then the Phillies re-signing JT Realmuto, and then you also have the Braves. I mean, how can we not forget about the Braves? So you've got four teams right there that could legitimately make a playoff push and could legitimately make a push towards being first in the NL East. There's still a lot of baseball to be played, and you still have to put this team out on the field and see what they can do. But at the end of the day, the talent on paper, it speaks for itself in the NL East. Each team's got a lot of guys that they could go to and rely on. Obviously, I think the Phillies, they have some more issues to kind of sort out, especially with their pitching, their bullpen pitching especially. But the Mets, the Nationals, the Braves, I think it could be definitely a three-way kind of battle between those three in the NL East to who's going to be in first place, because they're all three pretty good teams, and they've all made some major, major adds. So we'll have to see what goes on in the Empire State and really all the other NL East cities. But I'm going to close things out about a team I hardly ever talk about, in all honesty, which is the Seattle Mariners. And I'm getting into kind of a funner, or more fun, if you will, final part of the first segment, and it's the history behind the Mariners mascot, who just so happens to be a moose. They call him Mariner Moose, and in all honesty, it makes no sense for them to be a moose or have a mascot as a moose, but it's very intriguing. And I was on MLB.com the other day, and I was going through just kind of articles, looking at some stories, trying to see if I could, pull anything, try and talk about on the show, and this completely struck my eye. I mean, this was incredible, right? So this is the story behind it. The Mariners changed ownership back in the early 90s, and the new promotions and advertising team wanted to be a little bit more aggressive and try and reel in people a little bit more to come to games. So what they decided to do was they opened a contest for kids 14 and under to write in any possible ideas that they had for mascot names, which I think as a promotion team and really just marketing overall is a genius thing, right? Including kids, making them feel like they're part of the team. What more would you want as a kid, 12 years old, 10 years old, and your favorite baseball team, the Mariners, is saying, hey, write in what mascot ideas you have, and we're going to think about them, and you might be that lucky winner. So they had 2,500 entries, 2,500 entries. The one winner was a fifth grader. His name was Eamon Spiller, and he wrote in that he thought a moose would be a great fit. He said that they're fun and friendly animals, and that it would reflect the Mariners as they have fun no matter what. So, hey, Eamon, that was a genius idea, right? I mean, it's something that's stuck ever since. It's, I think, one of the most interesting kind of eye-catching mascots in all of baseball. And the Mariners, they went on with the moose, and it skyrocketed in popularity. I mean, right in line with a lot of the success that the Mariners had in that kind of early to mid-'90s window. They went to the playoffs for the first time in 95, and then they did it in 97 again. So a lot of success right at the same time as this mascot is gaining popularity in the area, which I think is a great thing. I mean, why wouldn't you want to have, kind of a symbol of that success? And it was during that same time that the Mariners were bringing about a mascot. Brett Reinhardt was actually one of the first mascots, or one of the first, mooses, if you will, or however you want to say it. He suffered a severe leg injury in one of the playoff games, and I believe 1996 was pretty horrific. Apparently he was trying I guess the moose, what his thing is that he goes out on an ATV and he does tricks out in the outfield or on the warning track. And I guess there was a trick that he was trying to do. It went wrong. I think he went flying into the center field wall or the outfield wall somewhere. It was not very good. He suffered, I think, a compound fracture, dislocated ankle. It was really, really bad. But he was able to bounce back, and he came back. And actually, the moose was a big part of a Nike commercial that when Ken Griffey Jr., who was then a rookie with the Mariners and kind of exploded onto the scene, I mean, that was probably incredible promotion, not only for Nike, but for the Mariners. I mean, not having Ken Griffey Jr., kind of the face of this franchise, but then you've got this mascot, and it's kind of this fun, lighthearted, kind of symbolic kind of message, if you will, of what Nike is trying to portray. Kind of, hey, you can be a great athlete, but you can also have fun and be lighthearted like this moose. And plus, the moose is just, I think, something nice for people to look at. Obviously something that is fun. It's exciting. It's, I don't want to say childish, but it's innocent, right? It's something that is. And I think that's what's so great about mascots. I actually have been on this weird mascot kick in the past couple of days after reading the story. And there's a lot of different mascots that I didn't even know that they existed. I mean, there's a couple that I was shocked by, right? I mean, the Rockies, Dinger, Dinger the dinosaur, I think that's what they call him. He's another mascot for the Colorado Rockies, and the story behind him is when they were digging up and excavating and kind of doing the construction on Coors Field, they apparently came across dinosaur bones underneath the stadium and kind of on the ground or the building site of where they were building Coors Field. And so it's something that kind of stuck with them, and as a result, now their mascot is a triceratops, which is a dinosaur. So very interesting how these mascots kind of come about, but again, just kind of some fun, lighthearted, lighten the mood a little bit news. I know there's been a lot of things going on in the world, in baseball, this, that, and the other. Is the season going to start on time? Is it not? Are we going to have fans in the stands? So on and so forth. So many uncertain questions, but I thought I'd bring in, and try and close things out in this news-filled segment with something that's a little bit interesting. And hey, I'm sure anybody and everybody that's listening was able to walk away and say that they learned something at the end of the day. So I think if I can do that, then I've definitely done my job. But folks, that'll do it for us in this first segment, but don't go anywhere, because when I get back from the commercial break, I'm going to share the teams that are in current playoff droughts that could end those streaks this upcoming season. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, everyone, to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all. And in our first segment, I got right into the latest news going around the MLB, not as a news-filled week as it was last week, but still some good stories and a little discussion on a mascot. But be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into discussing which breakout performers in 2020 could have similar seasons this upcoming year. But I want to discuss this, which teams that are currently in a playoff drought that could finally end that streak this year. So there's been a couple teams, about 5 or 6, that I would say that have had at least a 5 to 6 year gap from the last time that they went to the playoffs. So the first team I want to dive into is the Mariners. They've actually had the longest drought in baseball right now, 19 years. The last time they went to the playoffs was in 2001. I'm going to have to just go out and say right now that it's probably very unlikely that they'll be able to break that streak this year. They're very young. They don't have a whole lot of hitting. Their pitching's okay. I think that they're a couple years away, right? I mean, they've had a stretch of 90 and fewer win seasons, with their last 90-plus win season being in 2003. So 19 years the last time that you went to the playoffs, but 17 years since the last time you had at least 90 wins as a baseball team. That's pretty long. I mean, I think that the Mariners have to have been, in my opinion, one of the, I don't want to say one of the worst teams, but I'm probably going to have to say it, one of the worst teams in baseball over the last 10, 15 years. I mean, they're literally every single year at the bottom of the barrel. I mean, they've been in the doldrums of the MLB for years. But I think that in a couple years they could be pretty good. The pitching has been, it hasn't been great, right? And they had an up and down kind of rotation all year long, but they didn't have many double-digit start guys who also went into deep games. That was something that I also noticed. They only had 2 guys in their starting rotation that had at least 10-plus starts and had at least 50-plus innings of work. So their starters are not even going very long into the game. And I think right there that should tell you, A, probably not a whole lot of run support, B, probably not great pitching, and C, I don't think they're getting any help out of their bullpen. I will say, though, Kyle Lewis is clearly the future for them. I mean, if they can surround talent around him, if they can somehow build a team and use Lewis as that centerpiece, I think that they could be really good. I mean, he clearly showed this past year that he can put up big-time power numbers. Last 2 seasons, he's had at least an 800 OPS or higher. He had 11, 12 home runs this past season, 25, 26 RBIs. He actually, if I'm not mistaken, led all rookies in home runs, and he was top 2. Him and Luis Robert were the 2 main leaders in RBIs for rookies. So the Mariners definitely have a piece and a young player that could be used to build a winning team down the road. But they're going to need other guys like Evan White, who was their first-round draft pick a couple years ago. He really needs to step up, especially with the hitting. I mean, the fielding's there. He won a Gold Glove this past year. But when you look at his hitting numbers, I mean, they're atrocious. He was below 200 all year long. So I think that aside from him being a great fielder, he needs to work on that hitting in order for them to be a completely different team. I will say they're not in a very tough division, so that might be the one thing that I could maybe see them, I don't want to say sneak in, but maybe just slide right through into the playoffs if they can hope and pray that teams like the Rangers, obviously, and teams like the Angels, that are probably not going to be that great. Actually, the Angels, we'll hear about them in a little bit. They're another team that has been on a very long playoff drought. But could they not? I mean, could they maybe make a push potentially? Also depends on what the Astros are going to do this year and the Athletics. But still, the Astros and Athletics seem to be really running that division. And until I think a team like the Angels or the Mariners are able to make some sort of big move and they get some sort of huge season out of a superstar, then I don't really see anybody else taking that top spot from the Astros or Athletics for quite some time. I think the Mariners, again, they need to really focus on surrounding Lewis with other talent, and they also need to hope that some of the talent that they've drafted is going to pan out, because if not, I could see them being in this drought for much longer. I'm going to say about 3 to 5 years until they make their next playoff run. But I will say the next team, the Phillies, they haven't been in a drought as long, but still pretty long. I mean, 9 years. Last time they went to the playoffs was in 2011. This is, I think, a highly likely thing, in my opinion. I could see them breaking that streak this year. The problem is, though, this division is going to be one of the toughest divisions in baseball. I briefly mentioned in the first segment, but this division is going to be very challenging. You see all the ads that the Mets made, all the ads that the Nationals made, and then the Braves, they already had a lot of pieces to begin with, but then they go out and get more pieces too. And I think that's going to be another thing that you have to watch is how are those 3 teams going to fare? Because the Phillies, they've got talent. They've got guys that can perform. the pitching is a major issue, and I think that unless they are able to address it sooner rather than later, obviously Aaron Nola does a great job, right? Jake Arrieta, he's going to be a free agent, which I think is a blessing in disguise with how poor he's been the last couple of years. I mean, his efficiency, his production is way down, so I think that getting him off the payroll, getting him out of the rotation, it's going to lighten their load a little bit, but they've got a lot of hitting talent. I mean, you look at Real Mutos re-signing for a 5-year deal. You've got Harper there for forever, basically. Alec Baum, Rhys Hoskins. If they can find somebody at shortstop to fill where Didi was, they can get a solid team put together. But I will say they're going to have to probably figure out the pitching sooner rather than later, and especially the bullpen. I'm incredibly concerned about their bullpen. I mean, Archie Bradley has been a pretty solid pickup. They got him in this offseason. I think that he could maybe be a little bit of help, but you're not going to just get it done with one guy, right? That's just not realistic. That's not going to happen. Zach Wheeler as a starter has been a very nice piece to have. I think him and Nola could maybe play off of each other a little bit. And if they can add a third arm after Wheeler and Nola once Arrieta's gone, they might be a pretty good team. I mean, I would love to see them go after a guy like Jake Odorizzi. I think that he would be a great guy to have, and you could move those first three around a little bit. You could put Wheeler as the first, and then you could put Nola, and then you could put Odorizzi, or you could put Nola first, and then Odorizzi, and then Wheeler. Whatever you want to do, there's different scenarios that you could probably play out with these guys, and I think that if they can go out and get some legitimate starting pitching, I think they're going to be just fine. But they're definitely going to have a challenging road ahead of them, not as challenging as the Mariners, but they definitely have, and the Phillies have much more, right? I mean, it's very clear. The Phillies have so much more talent. They've got so much more talent across the board on paper. I mean, you've got Bryce Harper, a former MVP. You've got Rhys Hoskins. He was an all-star. He was, one of the best rookies when he was a rookie. Alec Baum, he was in the running for the Rookie of the Year this past year. JT Realmuto, he's one of the best catchers, if not the best catcher in baseball. But I think that they need, if they want to get back to that kind of mid to late 2000s form that they were in, they need to go get that pitching. They've had actually 3 80-plus win seasons since their last playoff run. So they're very far removed from that 08-09 Phillies team where they went to back-to-back World Series. I think that, again, with a mix of young talent and with Realmuto and then Harper, and they can go out and get some other pieces, yeah, I could see them breaking that streak this year, but we're going to have to see what they do the rest of this offseason. Now, getting into some other teams, the Detroit Tigers, they've also been on a little bit of a drought themselves. 6 years was the last time, 6 years ago, that was the last time the Tigers went to the playoffs, 2014, and I just don't see this team making any sort of runs in the near future, right? I mean, they've had, actually, this is something I found very fascinating. They've had 3 straight decades of a losing record. They haven't had a winning record in an entire decade over a span of 10 years since the 80s. So the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s have not been glamorous decades. And now the 2020s, they kicked it off with a losing record also. But again, not nearly as long of a drought as the other two teams. They had a couple stretches of 90-plus win seasons. 2013, 2014 were great years in Detroit. I mean, 93 wins and 90 wins respectively. But from 2009 to 2014, they didn't have below 80 wins. And then since 2014, they've only had one 80-plus win season. So right there was a big change once 2014 hit. And I think that was, again, probably the start of when Cabrera was on his way out of just his overall production, right? I mean, he's clearly not the same player as he was a couple years ago. Then you had Verlander leave. You had Scherzer leave. You had a lot of guys over time start to kind of exit out of Detroit, and I think that was part of their demise a little bit in the long run. And I think that if they want to get back to that, they're going to have to bite the bullet a little bit here and go through a couple years. I mean, Miguel Cabrera is still on a very long contract. He's eating up a good bit of their payroll, and I just don't think that he is the player that he once was, right? I mean, he's clearly declining, and now that they've got, him on there for a little while, I think once they can get him off their payroll, then they can go out, make some moves, make some ads. But that payroll is getting really, chewed up right now by Cabrera. And I think that they've got some nice young pieces, too. You look at Heimer Candelario. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's going to be a very, very good player in the long run. Obviously, Jacoby Jones, if he can stay healthy. But then you've got veterans that are pretty good, too. Jonathan Scoop, he's been pretty solid in his career. He's been an all-star before. But let's not forget who their manager is, right? A.J. Hinch, he's somebody that has done this before. Now, there's a lot of speculation around him, and when he came to Houston and he rebuilt a losing franchise and built them into a World Series contender, yeah, there was a lot of cheating. There was a scandal around it, this, that, and the other. But he does have a track record of bringing teams out of the bottom and pulling them into at least first or second place. So now, it wasn't an immediate thing, right? I mean, he still had about a year or two where he had to kind of get his footing and figure out building this team. And then once he was able to do that, the Astros, they were I mean, they're still one of the top teams in baseball as it is. So I think it's going to take a couple years, right? And I think it's going to take a little bit longer than it did for A.J. Hinch to rebuild the Astros, because I just don't think that this Tigers team at this standpoint right now where they're at have the pieces that the Astros had at one point or another when A.J. Hinch came on initially. I think it was a matter of everybody it was the right place, right time in Houston, and I think that's what it was. And I think it's unfortunate that it's been overshadowed by something so scandalous like a cheating scandal. But I think that in Detroit, a fresh new start, clean slate, everything, and so on and so forth, I think that it'll probably be a 4 to 6 year project in all honesty. But I could definitely see them maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, depending on what A.J. Hinch does as their manager, making a little bit of a push sooner rather than later. But I'm going to say 4 to 6 years before they're actually back in the playoffs. So right now, the Phillies are the only team I could see breaking this drought and ending their streak. But getting into another team, the LA Angels of Anaheim, whatever you want to call them, the last time they were in the playoffs, again, similar like the Tigers 6 years ago in 2014, and they've fallen on hard times, I've got to say. I mean, it's been a pretty tough couple years. And honestly, even going further back than 2014, they've only been to the playoffs that 1 year in 2014 since 2009. So in 10-plus years, they've only made one playoff appearance. So that right there, again, that streak is a little misleading. I mean, you take 2014 away, and they've got a longer streak of not being in the playoffs than the Phillies do. And I think that was just kind of that one little blimp on the radar screen in 2014. Mid-2000s, though, that was a great time to be an Angels fan, right? They won a World Series in 2002. They are all high and mighty. They beat Barry Bonds and the San Francisco Giants. Very dramatic series. And then things just kind of unraveled, right? I mean, it's clear. And they do have very good players, though. That's what's kind of aggravating about them, is that they've got a lot of talent. They've got Anthony Rendon. Although he did start off slow in 2020, he picked it right back up and had a really good season. And then Mike Trout easily one of the best baseball players of all time. Then you got Shohei Ohtani, who is an enormous asset. You can put him on the mound. You can put him at the plate. My personal opinion, I think that you leave him as a hitter and you don't put him in as a pitcher, because I think that once you do that, it's two different motions on his upper body, and I think that is kind of why he's had some injury issues. I think that you've got to kind of pick one or the other, and I think that he's going to be more suited as a hitter than he's going to be as a pitcher, even though their pitching is pretty dismal. I think that he'd be much more useful as a hitter. They did lose Andrelton Simmons to free agency. Tommy La Stella, the same thing. I mean, well, they traded him, and then he's now with another team. Two guys that I think were going to be big pieces for them, but again, no longer there. They added Jose Iglesias, who had a very solid season, even though it was in a limited time. And I think it was only played in 24 games out of 60. So he didn't even play in half the season. So he still has some kind of proving to a lot of people, I would say, a lot of proving to do. And then they also added some good pitching with Joe Musgrove. I think that they need more pitching to surround Bundy, but I think that they go out and get Musgrove. He could have a breakout season. Once Pujols, again, very similar to kind of the Tigers, once Cabrera's gone, once Pujols is gone, I think it's going to free up and take a huge load off their chest for their payroll especially, and they can go out and make a big push for certain players. And honestly, I could see Jose Iglesias, I mean, call me crazy, but he could be kind of a rent-a-player. Think about all the shortstops that are going to be free agents in 2021, right? If the Angels can make a huge splash this offseason, they can then go ahead and unload Iglesias or trade him maybe, and then they can go out and pick up somebody like Carlos Correa or a guy like Trevor Story, a guy like Javi Baez, whomever it might be. They could go out and make that move, and who wouldn't want to come to L.A., right? That's a very attracting thing. Warm weather, nice weather. Why would you not want to go there, right? And although there have been talks about Bauer coming to L.A., I don't really know if they're going to pay such a huge contract to him, because they have other guys on huge contracts, and I just don't know if that their payroll can hold that. I think, again, maybe if they had Pujols off the payroll, different story, but look at how much Trout's making, look at how much Pujols is making. It's not, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe Rendon signed for a very, very long deal as well, so they've got a couple guys on their roster for the next couple years, and I think that's going to be, once they can try and flush a couple guys out and they can get some new faces and they can alleviate all of that kind of a buildup that they've got with that payroll, then I think they can really make some moves. But I think they could snap out of it in 2 to 3 years. I'm going to say 2 to 3 years when they make a legitimate playoff run. But until then, I really don't see anything happening for them. Now, getting into the last two teams, the Pirates and the Royals, both of them have not made the playoffs since 2015. The Pirates have no shot of making it, right? I mean, this team is in a complete rebuild phase right now. I mean, it is incredibly advisable for them, in all honesty, because this franchise has fallen on hard times. And they've got to get rid of these pieces that they are getting rid of. I mean, they have to, right? I mean, it's clearly not working. It's clearly not panning out for them in the long run. Get rid of them. Get rid of Josh Bell. Get rid of Joe Musgrove. Get rid of these guys so then you can go out, you can get really good, solid prospects, and that's what they've done. And as a result, they can build for the future. And I think that they are wise in doing that. I think Ben Sherrington has done a nice job so far taking over as the general manager. I think that it was a very smart move of him to get rid of the players that he did. I would then question him if he got rid of guys like Reynolds or Cole Tucker. That's who I would really kind of scratch my head at and say, why would you get rid of them? I would look at those two as kind of the cornerstones to your future team's success, because they're the only two guys coming out of the minors that have made any sort of huge push at all to being legitimate players, right? I mean, Cole Tucker still has some figuring out from the plate to do, but look at a guy like Brian Reynolds. I mean, he has been really, really good, and he had a great first year. So I think that they are fine with those two. They just need to get other pieces. And it was smart for them to go all in and get that talent. This is, again, at least a 4 to 5 year project. I don't see anything happening for at least 4 to 5 years. And honestly, that might be generous. I might be being a little bit generous in that regard. But they're going to have a much longer road, I think, than teams like the Angels and the Tigers. I compare them to kind of the Mariners, but the Mariners have kind of been in a stagnant state for years, whereas the Pirates seem to just have continued to get worse and worse, and now I think it's going to be a slow uphill climb, but they're going to eventually make their way back up to the top of the mountain. But the last team, like I mentioned, the Royals, the last time they went to the playoffs, they won a World Series. But again, they've fallen on hard times. They've lost some guys over the years like Moustakas, Kane, guys that were a big part of that championship run. And I do think that their division's going to be a little bit down as opposed to last year, but I don't think it's going to be as down as, say, the NL Central will be. I think that the White Sox will still be good. I think that the Twins could still be good. But the Indians and the Tigers, I don't really know what to think of. I mean, the Tigers I know what to think of, but the Indians, there's a lot of kind of uncertainty, I feel, with that team, right? There's kind of this overall, I think, theme that they've lost Lindor. You know, they've got great pitching, but who's going to be a big hitter for them, right? I mean, I think that's going to be, you know, kind of a huge question. I mean, you got Jose Ramirez, sure, but who's after that? I mean, what are you going to do after that? You have to kind of fill in the pieces because it's not going to be just one guy that's going to take you to the promised land. So, again, I think that if they can be smart in who they can, I mean, they've been pretty smart in this offseason in pieces that they've gone out and added, and they do lose, you know, free agents potentially like Salvador Perez and Michael Franco, and both of them were 270-plus hitters a year ago, and they were actually their two leading home run hitters last season. So those two guys off their roster potentially could be huge holes that they're going to have to fill, and I really don't know how they're going to do that on such a low payroll, but they've gone out, they've gotten guys like Carlos Santana, who's going to bring in some hitting. He's going to bring in some patience at the plate, coming off a year where he led the AL in walks. You've got some solid pitching coming back, Greg Holland being re-signed, and they've got some all-right defense in the outfield. You've got Michael A. Taylor, not a great bat, but he does provide good defense. So I would say 3 to 4 years until the Royals are back in the playoffs. But again, the Pirates and the Mariners are going to have the longest road. I think that the Angels, Tigers, and Royals are going to have the next longest road. But the Phillies, I could see them breaking it very soon. I mean, sooner rather than later. But again, we still have to see these teams put out on the field. We have to see them perform. And until then, we can't really say a whole lot because it's anybody's ballgame as of right now. So that'll close things out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial, I want to get into some MVP conversations and discuss the 2 early MVP picks and potential candidates for this upcoming year. It's been a lot of fun so far, folks, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today, Jack Ridenauer again. And in the previous segment, I highlighted which teams who currently are in playoff droughts are the most likely to get out of that drought this year and make the playoffs. But I want to now get into some MVP candidates for this year and some players I could really see having MVP caliber years, honestly. There were some very good players this past year. I mean, we cannot discredit them, and even though it was 60 games, and I know that is going to probably be something that is highlighted for the rest of time, I think. Wherever you look and whenever you look in the record books and you see the two MVPs from this past year, Jose Abreu and Freddie Freeman, you're going to obviously say, okay, they only played 60 games. So if they had played an entire season, a lot of different things could have happened, right? I mean, it's very clear, it's very obvious. A lot of different things could have occurred. Somebody could have gotten injured. Somebody could have wound up having a massive slump. You know, Jose Abreu could have gone, I don't know, 5 for his next 55 after the All-Star break and have a complete second-half meltdown. Who knows? There could have been a lot of things that could have happened, but nonetheless, they still had some very, very good seasons. So I want to get into some different candidates and who I think could potentially be some obvious selections for next year, and then also some possible sneaky picks, you know, some kind of off the beaten path and ones that you would not probably initially think of. So the first one, obviously, Jose Abreu. I mean, I think you can, without a doubt, say that he's going to be in the conversation at some point, even in the beginning of the year, whenever it might be. The guy had an incredible season this past year. I mean, 60 RBIs, led the entire league, 19 home runs. What couldn't the guy do, right? I mean, the guy was literally on a complete tear. He batted .317. He's had back-to-back years batting above .280. He's a very consistent, I would have to say, 25 to 30 home run hitter and then 90 to 100-plus RBI guy. So somebody that can really put up a lot of offensive production. And it's very clear that his average has also, at times, continued to, it kind of goes a little, it goes down, and then it goes up, and then it goes down, and then it's really started to kind of, you know, taken a big uptick, if you will, recently. And I've got to say that his OPS numbers have always been very, very consistent. His career OPS plus is a 136. So, like, this guy is without a doubt, without a question, an MVP candidate just walking into the season. I think that that's a very obvious one. So, and especially with him being on the White Sox, and I don't know how good the AL Central is going to be this year, and I could definitely see them being, you know, a little bit of a struggle. It might be a struggle for some other teams, and so as a result, it might make things look a little bit better for the White Sox. They might stand out a little bit more. They're going to get a lot of media attention, too, and that, I think, is going to also play a big factor into really anybody that wins it, right? I mean, the people, the players that get the more attention, and the teams that get more attention, and the teams that win more, those players are going to get highlighted more. That's just how it works, right? I mean, that's just kind of how, you know, the media is going to pay attention to that. So I definitely think that Jose Abreu is going to for sure be a candidate. And then the next one, obviously the other one in the NL, Freddie Freeman, right? I mean, we can't say that he probably won't be at one point or another an MVP candidate, because the guy, again, he had a career year last year, batted above 340. He's batted above 300 in 4 of his last 5 years, and he's, again, another consistent 25-plus home run hitter, somebody that is going to be, I think, very good for many, many years more. I think he's going to be, I mean, he's got a lot of time left in him, and not to mention, he's been, I would say, recently kind of more on a little bit of an uptick, too. I mean, very similar to Jose Abreu. I feel like they're kind of starting to really ascend at the same time, and they kind of had this, you know, gradual build-up. They were always very well-known. They were very respected baseball players, and they were very talented, you know, leading up into this past year. And I think this is not necessarily their peak, but this is kind of the starting of it. and I think they're going to, ride this out for a little bit. And Freeman, he's been very, very good. I mean, his career OPS, was out of this world this past season. I mean, his OPS was above 1,000. I mean, he had a really, really great year. But here's the thing. He's going to be in a little bit more of a challenging division. He's going to, I think, run into some more challenges than somebody like Jose Abreu will, because the NL East, and again, I feel like I sound like a broken record, but it's very, very true. That's going to be a very, very competitive division. There's going to be a lot of teams elbowing their way to first place, and I don't think it's going to be an easy route for any of them. And so as a result, I think that players in that division are definitely going to I'm not saying that they're not going to be successful, not have great years, but it's going to be harder for them to put up MVP crazy-like numbers as opposed to guys like Jose Abreu, who they're going to be going up against the Royals and the Tigers, and the Indians are probably not going to be that great. And you never know what the Twins are going to do. It's clear that the White Sox are going to probably run that division, unless, again, they kind of run into this similar issue that the Reds had this past, last year in the offseason, and they go in the year and they're very underwhelming. Unless they have that same effect, which I don't see that happening, this team, the White Sox, are going to probably dominate the AL Central. So as a result, it'll be easier for Jose Abreu. But I still think that Freddie Freeman is going to be, at the end of the day, a major MVP candidate. He can put up those MVP-like numbers. He did it this past year. He won it. Sure, it was only 60 games, but you know what? He's still capable of it. He has proven that. He has shown that. And as a result, I'm definitely putting him on my list for possible MVP candidate. Next guy, somebody that I think was a little bit robbed of being an MVP candidate this year. I mean, he still got, votes for it, but he wasn't in necessarily the top 5 or the top 3. Marcell Ozuna. I think that he had an incredible, I know I keep saying career year, but he literally had a career year. He had a career high in average at 338. OPS was 1.067. Slugging percentage was 636. He led the NL in home runs at 18. He led the NL in RBIs with 56. The guy had an absolute incredible season. He finished 6th in the MVP voting, which, again, he did get votes, so he did get recognized for it. But at the end of the day, I feel like I still think he got robbed. I really thought that he was so deserving of it. I don't know why. And it was kind of difficult when, obviously your other teammate, Freddie Freeman, is having just as good of a year as you are, although Ozuna did put up better numbers in certain categories than Freddie Freeman did. That's a proven thing. So I still think that at times could have definitely maybe been taken or kind of looked at differently, Marcell Ozuna at least in the MVP voting. But I still think that this upcoming season he's going to put up those similar numbers, but it's going to depend on what division I think he's going to be in. If he's in the AL and he can just focus on hitting and he doesn't have to worry about fielding, even though he has expressed an interest in getting back into the field and getting back to playing in an everyday kind of, skilled, position player or position, I think that, he could really put up serious MVP numbers, more so than if he was in an everyday lineup as a position player, having to play in the field constantly day in and day out. I still think that if he was in the AL, if he was just strictly a DH, that's why I think he was so good this year. In the NL, he was fantastic because it was a universal DH this season, and as a result, he was able to take advantage of that. He didn't have to play in the field all the time, even though, again, he has expressed an interest in doing it, and I don't know why. He's had so many shoulder issues. He's had surgery. He's clearly shown that he should just stick to hitting, and if he does, he's going to see a massive increase in his career. I mean, it's going to be very obvious to see. So I think that if he can land on an AL team, he'll be just fine, but an NL team, I still think he'll put up good numbers, but I don't know about MVP numbers. We're just going to have to see where he lands because, he really has had, a couple very good years, but this is the only time really that, that his average was this high. And, the next highest it was about 280. There was only one other time that his average was above 300 in it for an entire season. Other than that, it had never been above 280. So I think that it's clear to show that when he's not having to play in the field and he just has to hit, the guy clearly does a lot better. But we'll have to see where he lands. The next guy, George Springer. And this might be a little crazy of a pick. I know he might be kind of like a sneaky MVP. That's how I kind of view him right now. He's on the Blue Jays. I think he's going to be kind of that extra jolt for them that is going to really kick them into overdrive. I mean, I think this past year we just saw a little glimmer of what the Blue Jays can become. I think they can be a very good team in the long run. They've got a lot of young talent. And I think that with Springer, he's going to bring experience, championship experience, and not to mention a guy that's had 4 of his last 5 years have above 20 home runs. He's a huge RBI guy. I mean, he's been above 800 OPS numerous times in his career. He's had a 500-plus slugging percentage in 3 of the last 4 seasons. The guy can flat out hit, and he's a great fielder, too. So I think that already with the Blue Jays' roster that they have, you've got Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel, and now you got George Springer all in the outfield. That's a really good outfield. And then you figure out that infield, obviously, with Marcus Semien, then you've got Bo Bichette, Kevin Biggio, and then you'll probably have Vlad Jr. unless he decides to DH, whatever he might do. At the end of the day, I mean, that is a scary, scary ball team, right? I mean, that is a really, really good baseball team. So I think that Springer could be kind of the front man to this really good team that I think the Blue Jays, they're going to get a lot of attention. Again, they're going to be going up against the Yankees. If they can go toe-to-toe with them and they put them in their place for a couple games and a couple series, yeah, the media is going to be all over that. And again, I hate to have to bring up the media in this, but at the end of the day, players that get a lot of attention that are on high market teams or in major market teams, it's going to be very easy for them to win. Look at guys like when Christian Yelich won it. He's kind of an interesting case because he won it in a mid market, in a middle kind of the road market, smaller market in Milwaukee. But he had such an incredible season, and they were so good that they had all this media attention, and as a result, that is what drew attention towards him. Now you have to look at, again, other instances. I'm trying to think of, I mean, obviously you have, I'm trying to think of some other MVPs of previous years that, guys like Stanton when he won it, when he was in Miami. Miami it's in a smaller market for baseball. So as a result, I think that's, again, kind of another exception. They weren't great, but he was putting up monster numbers. So if you're having a really good year, the media is going to find you. And they're going to shine a light, and they're going to say, hey, this guy. So I think that Springer could be somebody that falls in that category of being on a team that winds up having a lot of attention on them, and he's kind of the main reason, and he's kind of the main superstar, and he's really the lead actor in the whole thing. Then I think he could definitely be an MVP candidate. I could definitely see it. He puts up very similar numbers to, I think, a lot of guys that get MVP votes and that wind up winning it. So I think that Springer could definitely wind up winning it himself also. So I'm going to put him down. Although he's kind of a sneaky pick, I could definitely see him coming out and winning it. The next guy, again, another obvious one, I would say Mike Trout, right? I mean, Mike Trout, he's got to be one of the best baseball players of all time. I mean, the guy's got numbers that are so mind-boggling that you look at them and your eyes just jump wide open, and you're like, wow, I can't believe somebody has put this kind of production up in their career. The guy's been a 3-time MVP already. I mean, the guy's won numerous awards. He's been an all-star numerous times. Not to mention, the guy can bat 35 to 45 home runs consistently in a season and 100-plus RBIs year after year after year. I mean, he puts up video game-like numbers sometimes. And he's a consistent over 1,000 OPS guy, consistent 600 slugging guy. I mean, the guy can literally do it all. He was born to play baseball. So I really do think that he's going to, without a doubt, be a candidate. I think that every year he's going to be a candidate until there's some sort of massive decline in his play, which I don't see happening for quite some time. There are some years where he is a little hobbled with injuries here and there, and I think it does set him back a little bit. But I wouldn't say that it's a huge issue overall, right? I mean, I'm trying to think of any major catastrophic injuries that he's had, and it's usually, in my opinion, what I've noticed is it's more so kind of just nagging little injuries. And if he doesn't have those kind of nagging little injuries, then he doesn't have to worry about a little tweak in his ankle or something in his hand, and he's healthy 100% the entire year. Yeah, I think he could be a front runner because what he can do is he can put up these numbers, these crazy video game-like numbers, year in and year out, and he can do it for the entire year. He has that ability to be that durable for an entire season, withstand that grind of playing 162 games, and he can go the full length of it, and he can put up that type of production. He can be that good. He can be that beneficial to his team day in and day out, and that's what's so incredible about him, is that his consistency, I think, is at such a high level. It's at such a high... It's so much more above everybody else. I mean, he's in a totally different tier, and there's not many guys with him. So that's why I think every year, without a question, he's going to be a candidate for the MVP. Again, he's won it 3 different times. He's been an all-star pretty much every single year that he's played in the MLB, minus his rookie year. I mean, the guy can literally do it all on the diamond. He really can. So if he has no injuries and he's healthy for most of the season, or at least 3/4 of the season or whatever, I could definitely see him being a candidate for the MVP without a doubt. So getting into the last couple guys, I'm going to talk about Francisco Lindor. I think that he could also be a candidate just because, again, he's going into a larger market, going from Cleveland to New York. That's a very, very big jump. And again, media attention. And I hate to continue to bring it up, but it's a very important thing in the entire equation, because that's a big part of how people who wind up voting and can get exposure to seeing you and play, seeing you play. The attention, the media publicity, that is a ginormous part of it. So the larger market that your team's in, again, the more attention and more broadcasting there's going to be, and as a result, there's going to be more eyes on you. And I think Francisco Lindor is going to be another case where there's going to be more people watching him this year than there probably has ever been in his entire career. I mean, with this newfound Mets team, all of the moves they've made with James McCann and Jacob deGrom, obviously, and if Pete Alonso has an incredible season this year, and Dominic Smith, I mean, he had, and we'll hear about Dominic Smith in one of the segments coming up here, because he had an incredible season, and I think that he's going to be another big piece in their success. You obviously have Jeff McNeil, Michael Conforto. The list goes on and on and on. I still think that they have a few things to work out, but the guy's been one of the best hitters at the shortstop position the last couple of years. Since 2016 or 2015, kind of that general area, he's led all shortstops in home runs, extra base hits, and total bases. The guy has literally been one of the best with the bat at shortstop. Not to mention he's a great fielder, too. He had a little bit of a down year this year. Not a great season, batted around 250, 260. He usually hovers around 280 consistently, I would say, and he puts up good power numbers. So, yeah, I think he was kind of another case where 2020 wasn't the greatest year for him. But I think that if he can put up numbers like he's done in the past, A, and B, the other factor is I keep bringing up the NL East because they've been so good, that it's going to be a tough division to get through. It's going to be definitely a challenge because there is a lot of pitching that's really good in that division. Now, some of that pitching is on his team, but they are going to go against the Nationals, and they do have Max Scherzer. They do have Steven Strasburg. They still have Patrick Corbin. And then the Braves, they have Max Fried, Ian Anderson, Charlie Morton. So they're going to have weapons to throw. And then all of a sudden you've got the Phillies, and you've got even the Marlins with Sixto Sanchez. He's going to be one of the better pitchers, I guarantee you, in the next 3 to 4 years. He's going to be a sensation. The guy comes up from the minor leagues out of the single A literally after, I think it was not even 5 or 6, very few games he played, had like a .5 ERA and had 30-some crazy numbers, and gets called up, and he puts up incredible numbers in the majors. So it's going to be, I think, a challenge for guys that are going to be in the NL East, like Francisco Lindor. But again, I think that he's going to be in a larger market, being able to be more exposed to more just media attention, and then also just being the player that he is, how talented he is. I think that he's definitely going to be a candidate for MVP this year. And then the last two, Fernando Tatis and Corey Seager, I think Tatis has got a very good shot at being an MVP. I think that at the beginning of the last year, he put on such a show. It was an incredible, display of how talented he really can be. And I think that we saw, again, kind of a little glimpse at the potential that he has to be that good. I mean, he's batting well above 300, putting up incredible home run numbers. I think he was the first one to 10 home runs, if I'm not mistaken, which it's kind of crazy to say 10 home runs and make it sound like it's a lot, but in a 60-game season, it's a lot. Tatis has the ability, I think, to be one of the best baseball players in the MLB. I really do believe that. He is very, very talented. He's got a great glove, too. Obviously, I think that that is something he could definitely clean up a little bit. And not to mention, I think that he could also, at times I feel like he might be a little bit impatient as a hitter, but I think that just comes with being a young hitter, right? Just being, not necessarily completely accustomed to the speed of baseball quite yet. I mean, he hasn't even played an entire season. And so that is another thing that I do wonder, can he, because we saw last year his numbers started to go down a little bit. As the season went on, his numbers dipped down. He wound up batting around 278, 277. And so I wonder can he put on an incredible performance for an entire season? Can he kind of do what Mike Trout can? I think he's capable of it. I definitely think that he could do it eventually. He's also really young. We have to remind ourselves he's under 25. He's under 24. I think he's around 21, 22. So he's really, really young. So talk about a lot of time ahead of him. He's got plenty of it. And I think that he's going to become an MVP candidate, whether it's this year or the year after, whenever it's going to be. He's definitely an MVP caliber player. So I'm going to put him on my list. And then Corey Seager, I'm picking Corey Seager as kind of a last option, and kind of, again, very similar to George Springer, kind of a sneaky pick, because what Seager's got going for him right now is a lot of momentum. He's coming out of last year playing really, really well. He had a great season in the regular season, batted, I believe, 307, 308, had a really solid season power-wise, and then he goes into the playoffs and he continues that on, and he continued that trend. He's capable of hitting 20-plus bombs in a season. He does have overall good power numbers, and he's riding that momentum off of that World Series. He was the MVP, and if he can continue that and pick that back up in the beginning of the season, I think that he can kind of get back in the full swing of things, no pun intended, and I think that he can really step up his game big time, because I think he's got a lot of talent too. I think him and Tatis could be kind of, I don't want to say you obviously have Cody Bellinger, because he could easily be an MVP candidate as well. Same thing with Yelich. You could even throw out Trevor Bauer, Jacob deGrom, but I think that Seager and Tatis are going to be kind of this fun little rivalry for however long Tatis is there and however long Seager's there, because I think the Padres and the Dodgers are going to form that little rivalry, because both teams are very, very good. The Padres have now, I think, put their lineup in the same category as the Dodgers, in my opinion, with the pitching and so much pitching, right? You've got Blake Snell now, Yu Darvish, Dinelson Lamet, when Mike Clevenger gets healthy, Mike Clevenger. The list goes on and on and on. It's pretty incredible. And then you've got all the hitting that you want in the world. And so I think the Dodgers the same way. They've got a lot of hitting, although Jock Peterson no longer with the Dodgers. Now I believe he is with the Chicago Cubs, signed a 1-year, $7 million deal. And then also, obviously, Nolan Arenado, he is being traded over to the Cardinals, $50 million in exchange for them in, I believe, cash. So I think the Rockies are going to get, quite a bit of money. Didn't mean to kind of just randomly throw that out there. Just actually saw that pop up on my phone. So kind of I don't want to say breaking news, but as of very, very late on January 30th, actually this is very early, this is Saturday morning, so late night recording, breaking news, I guess, from the MLB world. But anyways, back to the MVP conversation. I think that Corey Seager and Tatis, they're going to have this little fun back and forth, because, again, I think that these two teams are very comparable now, and I think this NL West is going to be one of the most fun divisions to watch in baseball. The NL West, NL East, I think are going to be a blast to watch. The NL is going to be a very fun league in general to watch this year. So we'll have to see. Those are just some of my MVP candidates, and also just sprinkling a little breaking news for you also in there. I know I missed it in my first segment, but I figured I would try and follow up here with it in the third one. But folks, that's going to do it for us in this one. Thanks for sticking around. Stay right there. We'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, which will feature a conversation about players who had breakout 2020 seasons that could come back this year and have a similar performance in 2021. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we've got one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you. And in the previous segment, I discussed which players I think could be in the MVP conversation this year and who we could potentially see as the best player in the league this season. I want to now finish the show, though, with discussing which breakout performers I could see coming back and having similar performances in 2021. And before I get into it, I'm going to continue to use this point because it is probably one of the most valid points, and you have to use it. It was only 60 games. So, because of having a 2020 breakout season, all of these guys, I feel like, fall under this umbrella right now of, yeah, you had a breakout season, but it was only 60 games. So we don't really know what kind of player you are like in a 162-game season. There's still 100 games to play after 60, so what are you like after the fact, right? So I think there's going to be a big kind of, although there is going to be some hope and there's probably going to be a higher expectation, there will probably be a question mark for some of these guys that had big 2020 seasons. Now, maybe not some more than others, right? You know, not so many or not certain ones over a certain, other certain ones, but I think there are some breakout performers from 2020 that are going to wind up maybe not necessarily having the same year, but I'm going to mention a couple that could. I definitely think that there's a good solid 5, 6, 7 of them that could for sure have a follow-up to their breakout season in 2020. So I want to first talk about Randy Arozarena because, Arozarena's got one of the most interesting cases in all of baseball. Really didn't make his MLB debut. Well, he made his MLB debut the year before, but he didn't make his season debut until August 30th. So he was way, way, way down the line of when the season had already started that he started playing. Then all of a sudden he just went on an absolute tear. I believe out of his last 77 or 76 plate appearances in the season, in the regular season, he had 7 homers, and then he just all of a sudden stomped on the gas. I mean, he absolutely went full throttle in the playoffs. He hit 10 home runs, 29 hits. He batted .377. He slugged .831, which is staggeringly high, and his numbers were literally historic. I mean, he set numerous records, not only for a rookie, but just an overall just player in the MLB in postseason record. He broke Derek Jeter's rookie record of most hits by an MLB rookie in the playoffs. He also broke the overall record, if I'm not mistaken, for hits in the playoffs. I believe he tied, or he might have broken the record for most home runs in a playoff. He broke so many records, it was impossible to keep track of. I remember actually every time I would come on the show back during the summertime and in the winter time, or fall time, I should say, when the World Series was going on, I felt like every time I was coming on the show, I was sharing some new record that he was breaking. I mean, he literally became just this walking record book. It was insane. But he could, I think, definitely follow that up. I think that although it wasn't an entire season, we have seen glimpses of him, and I think that we've seen kind of little flashes of his brilliance and the ability that he has. And, I mean, there was points in the playoffs where I just confidently felt every time Arozarena went up to the plate, he was going to get a hit. I literally didn't even think that he just had a chance or that there was a possibility. I felt like he was going to get a hit every single time he was up at the plate. And he did at times. I mean, there were some times where whenever I was watching, every time he was up, he would get a hit, and it was incredible. Like, it was almost this like guy that could just not miss, like a shooter that couldn't miss, or a quarterback that just completes like 15 straight throws, whatever you want to compare it to. It was incredible to watch. I will say, I wonder if teams are going to figure him out. Right now, everybody's seen him perform this high at this high of a stage. And I wonder if teams that were sitting at home, everybody that was hanging out just watching the game and watching the World Series, they now know how to pitch Arozarena, and they now know how to approach him. And so I wonder if people are going to come into the season very prepared to take on Arozarena because of what he how he stormed onto the scene, really. I mean, it was incredible. And so I think that if he gets figured out, he's going to have to make a major adjustment. I will say I think he's capable of it, but we'll have to see. Nonetheless, he's going to be probably the main offense, I would say, right now for the Rays going into the season, but I definitely could see him having a breakout year. Now, the next guy I want to talk about, Devin Williams, Brewers guy, big fan of Devin Williams, right? I mean, he won numerous awards. If I'm not mistaken, he won the Rookie of the Year in the NL. He was a finalist and I believe won the NL Rollins Reliever of the Year award in the NL. The guy had a sensational season. 0.3 ERA. 0.33 ERA. You can't get much lower than that. You really can't. And struck out 53 in 27 innings, so just about 2 Ks an inning, 2 Ks an outing. Pretty impressive efficiency rate and strikeout rate. Talk about being untouchable, right? And I think the Brewers, they have a few sneaky good pitchers. Corbin Burns, another guy that had a big blow-up season this year. Josh Hader, obviously one of the better closers, if not one of the best closers in baseball. Brandon Woodruff, also very good pitcher, I think very underrated pitcher. Although I would say he probably would not be a number 2 option on a lot of teams. I think he could be, for some teams, one of the best, I would say maybe 3 or 4 option pitchers in some rotations, certain rotations. But for the most part, this Brewers team, they've got a lot of hitting. They're going to have to just hope that they've got a lot of pitching. And they do have a good bit of hitting, but they have to hope that the hitting steps up this year because it clearly did not do that this past year. But the pitching is very good, and I think Devin Williams is going to be a big part of that moving forward if they can keep him around. Not to mention, if Josh Hader gets traded, right, and he's always at the center of trade conversations, if he's gone, Devin Williams, I think, is their closer. I really do believe that. I mean, if the guy is striking out guys at that fast of a rate, I mean, literally he's just moving through innings left and right. Talk about, I mean, you're not even moving through innings. You're flying through innings. It's incredible. So I think that he could definitely follow it up this year. Obviously, I hope that the Brewers do, and I hope that he does because I'm a huge fan, so I'm going to be pulling for him. But I definitely think that Williams, he's going to have a very, very good career. I think he's got a bright future ahead of him, and I really, really like already where he's at. And again, it's only 60 games, but I think that, when you're a pitcher, and especially coming out of the bullpen, and when you're a reliever, you don't nearly get as many, I would say, reps and opportunities as a hitter is going to, or even a starting pitcher is going to. So as a result, you already have kind of a smaller sample size as it is. So I don't even think that this should really matter. I think it just shows just how efficient he can be on a smaller size, yes, but I still think that it's a very impressive showing nonetheless. So I think that he's going to have a big follow-up year. And then, again, somebody that, I mean, he's become one of my favorite players. One of my favorite players this past year, Marcell Ozuna. I think that, again, it depends on where he lands. If he winds up in an AL team's uniform, right? If he winds up on the Astros, which I've heard his name floated around. I've heard his name floated around. The White Sox, wherever he lands in the AL, he's going to have, I think, an MVP caliber year. I think he could follow up his 2020 season. Obviously is a good fielder because he's had good fielding showings before. I mean, he's won a Gold Glove. But I don't know if he's really as good as I think he might think because he's really ready to go back to the field. He's ready to go back to a skill position, going back to being a position player. And I don't know if that's a great thing for his career because he's just such a good hitter, and he clearly showed it this past year. I mean, if you look at his numbers, right, and I briefly touched on, I believe, in the last segment, his numbers were staggeringly different this year as opposed to his career overall. He only had one other year where his batting average was above 300, other than 2020. Other than that, it was no higher than 280 at any other point in his career. It floated around 260 for the most part. And again, he's playing in the field in all of those seasons. He's playing an everyday position. So I think that if he can stay on a team that is in the AL and he can just be a DH, it's unfortunate that the DH is not universal because there's tons of teams in the NL, and it would really, I think, open the door for all sorts of possibilities for certain guys to land and certain guys to go to because of just how many teams are going to need that position. And I think that's another big part of it is they might not want to fill that position. It might be, another player to have to pay, and they're not going to be probably as high as a paid player as, a skilled position player is because that's just how it is. But nonetheless, if the DH had gone to the NL, I definitely think that it could have done things wonderful for guys like Marcell Ozuna, guys like Nelson Cruz, who is also a free agent, even guys like Michael Brantley, who could probably become a DH here sooner rather than later. And so I think that Ozuna, if he gets on an AL team, which I hope he does, I really do think he can wind up on an AL team. I would love to see a team like the Angels emerge out of nowhere and be kind of a candidate for him. I could even see maybe a team, hey, who knows? I mean, maybe the A's just take him for a year and just see what happens. Who knows? I think the possibilities are endless, but I definitely think that he could, for sure, have not a bounce back year, an even better year than he did in 2020 in 2021. So another guy that I honestly was very high up on the entire year, and he had a very good season. I mean, rightfully so. He was a very, very good player. Huge breakout season. And when I talk about breakout, because I'm going to discuss his numbers that he had, and then the numbers he had before, and again, he might be another case where we have a smaller sample size. Maybe it's a little misleading, but I don't think that's the case for him. Teoscar Hernandez, right? I mean, the guy really, really had an impressive season. Coming off a career year, almost batted .290, was right at .289, had 16 homers, 34 RBIs, part of one of the best hitting outfields in all of baseball. And I think that he's going to be another big part of that this year because this Blue Jays outfield is unbelievable. I mean, it is stacked. You've got 3 guys that could potentially have 25-plus home runs and probably, I would say, 80-plus RBIs. I think that Gurriel, Hernandez, and Springer are all capable of 25-plus homer, 80-plus RBI seasons. We could definitely see some sort of historic outfield, hitting-wise, at least in Toronto. I think that we're going to be very shocked with how good these guys are. I think Hernandez is going to be very, very good. Although it is, again, a shorter season, we'll have to see because in previous years, his average floated around 230 to 260. So then you see a shorter season, and then all of a sudden his average jumps up to 290 just about. You do probably question and say, all right, is that a little misleading? Is it just a shorter game? Is it a shorter season? But I mean, he's got a great swing. I think he's got a ton of potential. He's only 28, and he's coming off the best year of his career. So I think that this is just the beginning of something very special. He might become, in my opinion, a household name, especially with depending on how good the Blue Jays are going to be and a high-profile player like Springer. I mean, again, coming from a team that just won the World Series, they were around in this scandal. He was one of the best players on that team. He was an all-star, Silver Slugger. You know, the list goes on. As a result, like I keep mentioning, he's going to bring that attention towards him, bring the attention towards the Blue Jays, and that's going to bring attention towards Hernandez. Now, Hernandez did finish 11th in the MVP voting, so people did take note of that, okay? And he was a Silver Slugger. I'm sure if there was an All-Star game, he would have been an All-Star, but I'm definitely excited to see how he goes up against this AL East competition. I really don't think anybody's going to be afraid of the Rays. Clearly don't think anyone's going to be afraid of the Orioles. The Red Sox, maybe, depending on how they handle bringing Chris Sale back. I've seen a lot of different things where they're going to just slowly ease him back into things, whereas with the Mets, they're going to just throw Syndergaard right back into it and just say, hey, hit the ground running, and you're going to be off. So we'll see which approach is going to be better, not necessarily even short-term, but long-term for these two pitchers too. But I think that with this AL East pitching not as scary with a couple guys out of the AL East, although I think that, you know, the Yankees did go make some moves, but we'll have to see what's going to happen with that. I definitely think that Teoscar Hernandez could have another big year. I could definitely see that. I think the AL East might not be as frightening as a lot of people think, because I think a lot of the talent's over in the NL. I really do believe that. But the next guy who I think is going to have a he had a breakout year in 2020. I'll give him that. But I think he's going to have a breakout year in 2021, if not 2022, Kyle Lewis. And I know I mentioned him earlier briefly. He's going to be, I think, the future of the Mariners. If they can surround him with talent and if they can get other guys to kind of all buy in and they can get, you know, maybe they can try and develop a couple guys internally. I know that they're a small market team. They're in a smaller payroll. So as a result, they're not going to go out and get some huge guys. They're not going to go and be big spenders. But I think that they could definitely kind of trade here and there, probably upgrade through a couple trades, you know, use internal, strategies to build talent within the organization. And then all of a sudden you've got guys like Kyle Lewis. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he actually might have been drafted by them. And I think he came up through their minor league system. But he's definitely going to be somebody that I think is going to take a huge step forward in progression. And I think that, I always feel bad for guys like him they're essentially phenoms. They're sensations. And they're in smaller markets. They don't get enough attention. And I could only imagine the attention he would get if he was on a team like, even just like a team like the Angels or the Padres, or even a team like, I don't know, the Reds, obviously the Red Sox or the Yankees, a team like the White Sox or the Astros. Just somewhere that is going to get so much more attention than where the Mariners are, and that's what's unfortunate. I think that he could definitely be their kind of cornerstone for the future and for them to build around. I just think that I wonder what they're going to do, what kind of moves they're going to make, how they're going to make that happen. because they have a lot of things that they need to fix, and they definitely need to get some long, strong, durable pitchers that can go, long into the game. They're not just, short 4 or 5 inning pitchers, but guys that'll go the distance. They'll go 7 or 8 innings, and they're capable of doing that. Again, I think that they're a little ways away from that. Kyle Lewis, though, he's not. I think he's right there, and I think that if he continues to play as well as he's played before, and this is only his second year, right? His OPS has never dipped below 800. His average is around 260, right? But his numbers, if you looked at his numbers this year compared to last year, his numbers this year were on pace to probably be double, if not triple, what his numbers were last year. I mean, they were insane. 11 homers, 26 RBIs. The guy can clearly hit. He can field. He can do it all. I think the Mariners have a really, really good guy. If they can build around him, then I think that Seattle's going to be a spot to really watch, because they could have some really good baseball in the future. I think, again, it's very subject to change depending on how they do things, and hopefully he's not somebody that gets really good and they just can't afford him anymore because he winds up getting so talented and that he's probably going to be worth a lot of money. Then what do they do next, right? I mean, then they would have to probably let him go, and that would probably be, again, another rebuild phase. So hopefully they can get on their, high horse and try and get him, some talent around him to really build for that Mariners team. But then getting into, the last guy, Dominic Smith, I briefly touched on him in the third segment, but really want to kind of dive into what he's been up to in the fourth segment. He had a great season. I mean, batted .316, 10 homers, 42 RBIs. He played in 50 out of the 60 games. So, and he's a guy that he's been around for a couple years, and he's definitely on kind of an upward trend in his career. You look at his last couple years, and his numbers were kind of on an upward trend. And I think that, I'll put it to you this way, right? In about 40 less games from 2019. So in 2019, he batted .282 with 11 homers and 25 RBIs. And he had, again, 282 average in 89 games, 11 homers, 25 RBIs. In 2020, in 50 games, he had a .316 average, 10 homers, and 42 RBIs. So imagine if he had been given 40 more games to play, what his numbers would have been like at the same rate at 89 games. Probably would have been a staggering difference, in all honesty. He's also going to be on a team that's going to get a lot of attention. They're going to be all in the spotlight, and I think that he's going to be a player that's going to catch a lot of attention. I think people are going to he's going to be a name that people aren't going to forget. Dominic Smith is going to be a very good player, and, I mean, it's a huge difference from his 2018 season. Look at his 2018 numbers. They're .224 average. He only had 5 homers and 11 RBIs in 56 games. So even with, he completely blew his numbers from 2018 out of the water, and there was a 6-game difference from that point. I mean, completely blew them out of the water. So I think that he is on the verge of having a huge, huge career, and I really do think that the Mets have a really, really a bright, bright star for the future, and I think they've got a great team overall. I think that it's just a matter of them putting it all together and actually producing on the field and not kind of being, again, kind of disappointing, if you will, like the Reds. But we'll have to see what happens with this year. It's going to be an interesting year nonetheless. Really excited, though, because I think there's going to be a lot of players that we don't necessarily hear about or maybe even know much about that are going to have really big years. I could definitely see that happening. Guys like Dominic Smith, guys like Kyle Lewis, even guys like Marcelo Zuna, who we start to hear a little bit more about, or even guys like, who knows, I'm throwing out a name like Whit Merrifield, somebody that has a huge season, right? I think Whit Merrifield's one of the more underrated players, and I think that somebody like that could have a ginormous year, whomever it might be. I think that we're going to see players that we have not heard much about in the past have really good seasons this year, and we're probably going to continue to remember their names and continue to be familiar with them moving forward. But folks, as always, that's going to wrap it up for us here today. Thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review that really helps us out. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd really appreciate that. And as always, everybody, thanks so much for listening today. And until next time, have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.